The dust rolled across the plains like a warning. It clung to her boots, to her hemline, to the stubborn hope she refused to let die. Clara Whitmore had not walked 20 miles beneath a punishing Texas sun to turn back now. The ranch spread wide before her, endless fences, cattle shifting like a breathing sea. And at the center of it all, the man people only referred to as the Iron Cowboy. His real name was Cade Mercer, but names didn't matter much out here. Reputation did. She'd heard the stories. A widower, hard as the land he worked, spoke little, trusted less. Clara tightened her grip on the single leather satchel she carried. Everything she owned rattled inside it. Drought had swallowed her family farm. Debt had taken the rest. Pride was the last thing she had left, and she would not let it starve too. When she stepped onto the ranch yard, the men paused mid-task. Conversations stopped, the air thickened. Cade stood near the corral, sleeves rolled, hat tipped low. He didn't turn immediately. He finished adjusting a saddle strap with deliberate care before finally facing her. His eyes were storm gray, measuring. Unreadable. "I'm looking for work," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. "I can ride, mend fence, tend cattle. I don't need charity." Silence stretched. The wind shifted. He looked her up and down once, slow. "Not in hunger."
Not in mockery.
"Work," he repeated. "Yes." He removed his gloves, one finger at a time. "You won't last a week. Try me." A flicker of something passed through his gaze. Amusement, annoyance. "No," he said simply. The word hit harder than she expected. She swallowed. "Then I'll work for half wages." "No." The men nearby shifted uncomfortably. Clara's jaw tightened. "Then what will it take?" That's when he said it. "Marry me by sunset," he replied evenly, "or walk away." The world seemed to stop breathing. She stared at him, certain she'd misheard. "You're joking." "I don't joke." The sun burned overhead, indifferent. "You don't even know me. I know enough." Her pulse thundered in her ears. "You're asking me to marry you for a job. I'm offering you a home. Security. Protection." His voice never rose. "But I don't hire strangers, and I don't keep women on my ranch unless they carry my name." The audacity of it. The arrogance. "You think I'm desperate?" "I think," he replied calmly, "you wouldn't be here if you weren't." The truth cut sharper than insult. He stepped closer, not threatening, just immovable. "You've got until sunset." And with that, he walked away. Clara stood alone in the yard as the ranch resumed its rhythm around her. The humiliation burned hotter than the sun above. Marry him. She had expected skepticism, perhaps rejection, but not a proposal shaped like a dare. Yet as the hours crept forward, reality pressed in. She had nowhere to go. The nearest town was miles behind her. Her money would barely buy 2 meals. She wandered toward the water trough, splashing cool relief onto her wrists while her mind raced. What kind of man offers marriage like a contract? A dangerous one, or a lonely one? She watched Cade from a distance as he worked. There was no laziness in him, no wasted movement. He handled the cattle firmly but never cruelly. The ranch hands obeyed him without question. Not out of fear, she realized, but respect. A boy no older than 10 ran toward him carrying a broken bridle. Cade crouched to the child's height, speaking softly as he examined the damage. His hands were large, calloused, yet careful. Clara blinked. No one had mentioned a child. The boy laughed at something Cade murmured. The sound seemed foreign against the vast silence of the plains. A widower, they had said. Something shifted in her chest. Later, one of the older ranch hands approached her. "Name's Walter," he said kindly.
"You're thinking on his offer."
"I'm thinking he's lost his mind." Walter chuckled. "Cade don't do anything without reason?" "And what reason would that be?" Walter studied her. "He needs someone strong, not just for the ranch, for the boy." The pieces slid together. This wasn't romance, it was survival for both of them. Still, marriage wasn't something you bartered, was it? She sat beneath the shade of the barn, watching the sun inch westward. Every memory of hunger, every eviction notice, every night spent pretending she wasn't afraid resurfaced. She had asked for work. He had offered permanence. The question wasn't whether she loved him. The question was whether she was brave enough to gamble on a stranger. By late afternoon, the sky had turned molten gold. Cade stood by the fence line, watching the horizon as though it held answers. Clara approached slowly. Each step felt heavier than the last. "You don't even know my favorite color," she said quietly. He didn't look at her.
"Don't need to."
"That's not how marriage works."
"It is out here."
She folded her arms.
"Why me?"
Now he turned. "Because you didn't beg," he said. "Because you looked me in the eye. Because when I said no, you didn't cry." His gaze softened, just barely. "And because my son hasn't smiled at a stranger since his mother died. He smiled at you." Her breath caught. This wasn't a power play. It was a man drowning quietly. "I won't be owned," she said firmly. "You won't be," he replied. "You'll be my partner. The ranch becomes yours too. And if I say no, I'll have a wagon ready to take you halfway to town before dark. No bitterness, no threat, just certainty. The sun hovered, seconds from touching the horizon. Do you expect me to fall in love by dinner? She asked.
No.
He said. I expect respect, the rest we'll earn. The last rim of sunlight trembled against the earth. Clara felt the weight of two futures pressing against her ribs. Walk away into uncertainty, or step into something fierce, frightening, and solid. As the sun kissed the horizon, she lifted her chin. I'll marry you, she said. The wind carried the words across the plains, and Cade Mercer, iron cowboy, widower, fortress of a man, closed his eyes in something dangerously close to relief. They were married before the stars fully claimed the sky. No grand ceremony, no lace or music, just a preacher from town, a handful of ranch hands, and a sky so wide it felt like God himself was watching. Clara's hands trembled only once, when Cade slid the simple gold band onto her finger. His touch was warm, steady. When it was done, the ranch hands cheered softly. The boy Eli stood close to Cade's leg, staring at Clara as though she were a question he didn't yet know how to ask. That night, Clara stood in the doorway of what was now her home. Their home. The walls smelled of cedar and memory. A faded quilt lay folded at the foot of the bed. His late wife's, she assumed. Nothing in here changes unless you want it to, Cade said from behind her. You loved her. Yes. The honesty didn't wound as much as she expected. I'm not here to replace her, Clara said. I didn't ask you to. Their eyes met. Two strangers bound by a vow neither fully understood. Eli has nightmares, Cade added quietly. He won't say it, but he does. Clara nodded. Then I'll sit with him. Cade studied her, as if searching for regret. He didn't find any. Marriage was not softness. It was work. Clara rose before dawn, learned the rhythm of the ranch, earned the wary respect of men who had doubted her strength. She blistered her hands. She fell from a horse once and climbed back on before Cade could reach her. He watched her more than she realized. Not to control, to understand. Eli slowly gravitated toward her. First small questions, then shy smiles. One evening, he brought her a wildflower crushed in his fist. For you, he mumbled. Her throat tightened. Thank you, Cade saw. And something shifted again. They ate dinner together most nights. Conversation simple. Weather, cattle, fence repairs. But beneath it all, something steadier began forming. Trust. One night, a storm ripped across the plains without warning. Lightning split the sky. Cattle panicked. Clara didn't hesitate. She rode beside Cade into the chaos, rain slicing across her face. At one point, her horse stumbled. Cade caught her arm before she hit the mud.
Stay behind me, he shouted. I'm not made of glass.
She shot back, and for the first time he laughed. Not a short breath of air. A real laugh. Thunder rolled overhead as they worked in tandem, driving the herd back to safety. When it was over, soaked and breathless, they stood inches apart. The storm wasn't the only thing crackling. Weeks turned into months. They learned each other in fragments. She liked her coffee black. He added too much sugar. He hated silence at dinner. She found comfort in it. They argued once about expanding the south pasture. Voices rose, pride flared, but neither walked away. One evening, as the sun bled red across the sky, Eli climbed into Clara's lap and fell asleep mid-sentence. Cade watched from across the porch. You didn't have to stay, he said quietly.
Yes, I did. Why?
She looked at him fully now. Because you didn't marry me to own me. You married me because you were brave enough to need someone. The words struck deep. And you? He asked. I married you because I was tired of surviving alone. The admission hung between them. Cade stepped closer, slower this time. Not commanding, asking. When he kissed her, it wasn't a claim. It was gratitude. And this time, when the sun set, she didn't feel trapped by the horizon. She felt chosen. Trouble came in the form of men who believed Clara didn't belong. A rival rancher, bitter and ambitious, spread whispers that Cade's marriage was a sham, that he'd weakened himself by taking in a drifter bride. Cade heard the rumors, said nothing. But Clara did. When the rival confronted her publicly in town, mocking her past, she didn't shrink. I may have walked onto that ranch with nothing, she said evenly, but I built something with it. The town fell silent. Cade watched from a distance, pride blazing in his chest. That night, he admitted something he had never said aloud. You saved more than the ranch, he told her. She squeezed his hand. So did you. A year to the day after their sunset proposal, Clara stood at the same fence line. The sky burned gold again. Eli ran through the fields laughing. Cade wrapped an arm around her waist. No ultimatums this time, he murmured. She smiled. Good. Do you regret it? She looked at the land, the home. The boy who now called her Ma without hesitation. She looked at the man who had once given her the hardest choice of her life. No, she said. I'd choose you before sunset every time. His grip tightened. The wind carried the scent of rain and possibility. Years later, people would tell their story as if it were legend. The woman who came asking for work. The cowboy who offered marriage instead. They'd leave out the fear, the doubt, the nights spent learning how to trust. But Clara and Cade would remember, because love, they discovered, wasn't born in grand gestures. It was forged in storms, tested in silence, chosen again and again before the sun dipped below the horizon. And on every anniversary, as the sky turned molten gold, Cade would ask her the same question with a half smile. "Marry me by sunset." And she would always answer, yes. The drought came without mercy. It began quietly, a week without rain, then two. The creek that cut along the east pasture thinned into a nervous trickle. Grass lost its color. The cattle grew restless, ribs showing sharper each day. Clara noticed first. She always did. "We need to rotate the herd early," she told Cade one morning, scanning the horizon that had turned a pale, pitiless blue. "And ration the well." Cade studied the land like a man reading a wound. "It'll break," he said. "Storm's coming." But the storm never came. By the third month, neighboring ranches began selling off cattle at desperate prices. Bankers started making rounds again, their polished boots strange against cracked earth. One of them stopped at Mercer Ranch. Clara watched from the porch as the man adjusted his tie and spoke in low tones to Cade. Papers were exchanged. Numbers discussed. The banker smiled too easily. That night, Cade sat longer than usual at the table. "How bad?" Clara asked quietly. He didn't answer right away. "Bad enough." She folded her hands. "Tell me." He looked up, eyes shadowed. "If this doesn't break in 30 days, we lose half the herd. If we lose half the herd." He didn't finish. The ranch wasn't just business. It was legacy. It was Ellie's inheritance. It was everything they had built from a sunset bargain. Clara stood, walked around the table, and placed her hands on his shoulders. "Then we fight smarter." He covered her hands with his own. "You didn't marry into this to drown with me." "I married you," she replied firmly. "Not the weather." The next morning, she rode out before dawn, mapping every corner of their land. By afternoon, she had an idea. There was an unused stretch near the northern ridge, rocky, ignored for years. But beneath it, according to old survey maps she had once studied out of curiosity, ran a shallow aquifer line. Cade listened carefully as she explained. "It's a gamble," he said. "So was marrying me," she answered. For a second, the weight lifted from his face. By nightfall, they had hired a drilling crew. If they were going down, they would go down swinging. The drilling took days. Each metallic pound into the earth echoed like a heartbeat against their hope. Ranch hands worked silently. Eli carried water buckets trying to feel useful. Clara stayed close, dust coating her skin. Cade barely slept. On the fourth day, the crew leader removed his hat and shook his head. "Dry." The word felt like a gunshot. Clara closed her eyes briefly. Cade's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. He paid the men what little they could afford and watched them drive away. That night, Ellie asked softly, "Are we losing the ranch?" Clara knelt in front of him. "We're not done fighting." But even she felt the crack in her certainty. The following week brought something worse than drought. Fire. It started on a neighboring property, lightning striking brittle grass. The wind carried it fast and vicious. Smoke swallowed the horizon by mid-afternoon. "Move the herd," Cade shouted. Flames devoured fences. The sky turned red as war. Clara rode alongside the men, coughing through smoke, eyes burning. Heat lashed at her skin. At one point, Ely was missing. The world narrowed into panic. Clara abandoned her horse and ran toward the barn, heart slamming against her ribs. She found him trying to untie a trapped calf. "Look," she cried. He looked up, terrified but determined. "He'll burn." Without hesitation, Clara grabbed the rope, freed the animal, and dragged Eli outside just as the roof began to crack. Cade reached them seconds later, pulling them both into his arms. The fire raged for hours before finally burning itself out. By dawn, part of the ranch was ash, but the house still stood. The herd still lived, and so did they. Cade stood in the smoldering remains of the south fence, staring at destruction. Clara stepped beside him, soot streaked across her cheek. "We rebuild," she said. He looked at her. "Really look." "You don't break," he murmured. She gave him a tired smile. "Neither do you. Sometimes salvation doesn't arrive as rain. Sometimes it arrives as people." Word of the fire spread fast. By midweek, neighboring ranchers, even the rival who once mocked Clara, rode in with lumber, wire, spare feed. No speeches, no pride, just help. The rival dismounted awkwardly in front of Clara. "Heard you ran into a burning barn," he muttered. "Reckon that makes you one of us." She extended her hand. "Took you long enough." He shook it. By sunset, men lined the fence posts again. Women from town brought food. Children chased Ely through the yard. Cade stood at the porch, watching his wife coordinate repairs with calm authority. This was no longer the woman who had walked onto his land desperate for work. This was the backbone of the ranch. That night clouds finally gathered. Low, heavy, promising. Thunder rolled in the distance. Clara stepped onto the porch as the first drop fell against the dust. Then another, and another. The rain came slow at first, then steady, soaking the earth in a scent so rich it made her chest ache. Cade joined her, silent. Together they stood in the downpour, hands intertwined, watching the land drink. "You still would have stayed," he said, "even if we'd lost it." She turned toward him. "The ranch was never the promise." "What was?" "You." Lightning flashed softly behind them. For the first time since the drought began, Cade smiled without weight. Years softened the sharp edges of their beginning. Eli grew taller, stronger, his laughter echoing across fields that once nearly burned to nothing. The ranch thrived again, wiser now, diversified, smarter about water and seasons. Clara had introduced new breeding strategies. Cade had listened. Together they built something sturdier than pride. One evening, Eli approached them at the fence line, hat in hand. "There's a girl in town," he began nervously. Clara tried not to smile. Cade folded his arms. "There always is." Eli exhaled. "I want to ask her father for permission." Clara and Cade exchanged a glance layered with memory. "Do it right," Cade said finally. "And without ultimatums," Clara added pointedly. Eli frowned. "Ultimatums?" "Never mind," Cade muttered. That night, Clara lay awake beside her husband. "We'll build something good," she whispered. "We'll build something stubborn," he corrected gently. She laughed. But beneath it was all. They had started as strangers bound by survival. Now they were partners bound by choice. On the anniversary of their marriage, the sky once again burned gold. Cade led Clara out to the same spot by the old fence line, the place where he had first given her the impossible choice. The land stretched wide and forgiving now, green and alive. "You remember what you were thinking that day?" he asked. "Yes," she said softly. "I was thinking you were the most arrogant man I'd ever met." He huffed. "Fair. And I was terrified." He looked at her carefully. "Off me. Off needing someone." The honesty still felt sacred. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Her breath caught. Inside was a new ring, not simple gold this time, but one etched with tiny engraved wheat stalks wrapping around the band. "For surviving the drought," he said. "For running into fires. For staying." Tears blurred her vision. "You didn't have to, I did." The wind shifted, warm and familiar. He stepped closer. "No sunset deadline." He murmured. "No bargains." He dropped to one knee anyway. "Clara Mercer, will you marry me again?" She laughed through tears. "You already have me. I want to ask right this time." Emotion floated every year between them. "Yes," she whispered. 1,000 times yes. He slid the ring onto her finger as the sun dipped low. Not a threat now, not a ticking clock, just light. When people told their story years later, they often focused on the ultimatum. Marry me by sunset or walk away. It sounded bold, dramatic, almost cruel. But the truth was more complicated. He had been a man afraid to hope. She had been a woman afraid to trust. The sunset had simply forced them to decide. On their 25th anniversary, surrounded by children and grandchildren, Ely raised a glass. To the bravest proposal in Texas. Laughter rippled across the yard. Clara leaned into Cade's side as the sky began its familiar transformation. "Gold, amber, fire." He bent close to her ear. "Marry me by sunset." She squeezed his hand. Always, the sun slipped below the horizon, not as an ending, but as proof that some choices, once made with trembling hands, become the strongest foundations of a lifetime. And long after the light faded, long after the cattle quieted, and the plains rested beneath starlight, one truth remained. She had asked a cowboy for work. He had offered her forever, and she had chosen it. Again and again.